Disclaimer. These videos show some tips to help you on a through hike of the AT. The ideas presented are not the only way, merely one hiker's experience. Remember, hike your own hike.
Well, hello there, ladies and gentlemen, and welcome back to another
Tips from the Trail.
And today I'm out here on the Appalachian Trail, and I thought I would take a second to talk about finding a campsite, which campsite is going to work for you. What are some things to consider when choosing your campsite at night? We had an experience last night that reminded me that there's some pointers that you can use to help find the right campsite. When you're on the AT, and if you're through hiking the trail, one of the first things that is going to be a determining factor with choosing your campsite is distance. So you're going to be figuring out how far you're potentially going to walk on the day. Maybe you need to schedule a resupply for the day after, so you're trying to equal your mileage out in the 2 days. So distance that you're walking and where it's going to put you for, a trip through town or a resupply, how much food you have left. That's like number one when it comes to considering where to camp. Best way to figure this out is, like I always say, get yourself a good guidebook. We used AWOL's guide. I hear the Thru Hiker Companion is a great guide, and a lot of people are using the Guthook app. But get yourself one of these three, or maybe there's some more out there that I don't know of, but that'll give you all the information you need to know while you're planning to where like the campsites are and where you're going to be. Number two, now that you've chose a campsite or you have a section of trail that you're thinking that you'd like to camp in, I would suggest always looking for water sources, because when you're going into camp, it's very nice to not have to travel an extra distance for water. So maybe you're choosing a camp that actually shows that it has a water source. Maybe the camp's close to a stream or close to a spring. But not only that, maybe you're going to find a campsite that has a water source just before you get to it, allowing you to water up and walk a short distance to camp. I would avoid camps that don't offer any water source in the vicinity. Make sure no one's coming. I would avoid camps that don't offer any water source or don't have a water source within 3-4 miles before the camp, because now you're having to take all of your camp water and pack it into camp. Your water for cooking dinner, and then also you got to consider the water for breakfast and the water that it's going to take you to hike to the next water supply beyond camp. So those factors become very crucial in trying to keep your pack weight down and choosing your campsite. That one was a bit obvious, but not for everyone. Here's one that's a little bit more less known, I would say, and a lot of you guys are going to know this as well. But when choosing a campsite, a lot of times water sources can be by road crossings, and there's a lot of times campsites that are close to roads. Now, these campsites are more often used by locals and day hikers because it's easier for them to get to. So especially campsites that are right beside parking areas and roads, I tend to avoid them because it's a better chance that you're going to have other activity at your camp. And for me, I like to get to camp, set up my tent, cook, eat my dinner, go to bed, get up early and hike. And if you're like me and that's what you want, then camping close to roads is it's a recipe for disaster in my mind, because even on this trip we stayed at a shelter that was close to a road, and there ended up being maybe 15 or 20 campers through there that had just come off of the road that were just in for the night, and it adds a certain amount of chaos to your night. If you're looking for a nice peaceful night where you're just going to get in, eat, sleep, get on with your hike the next morning, a lot of thru hikers are looking for this. Roads are something that you may want to avoid. This leads me to stealth camping. Now, stealth camping is a term quoted on the AT, I think, or at least it's used commonly on the AT for camping in a spot that is not actually on your guidebook or in a map or anything like that. For example, I'm just walking by this, walking up the trail, and right here there's a little bit of sticks there, but I believe, here's your trail, I believe that right there is a spot that at some point in time somebody brushed those sticks out of the way and put their tent up there. That would be considered a stealth campsite. In my opinion, I think stealth campsites are okay as long as you're using those in a spot that you are allowed camping. There's a lot of places that you need to camp in designated spots. So if you're gonna stealth camp, make sure you are in a section of the trail that it is okay to do so. And when choosing a stealth site, unlike this one that looks like they plop down right beside the trail, you should at least make sure that you're 100 feet off of the trail. Get a little bit of a distance off of the trail before you set up your tent. Stealth sites are an amazing tool for a thru hiker that is trying to make miles and is trying to hike the AT and does not really care to be part of any crowds. They can use stealth sites to get in and get out of camp without being bothered by a lot of the other hikers. Now, I don't think that stealth sites are for everyone because there's some risks involved. One thing to consider with a stealth site is that for the most part, unless it's been used a lot or developed, it's going to have a lot more brush and undergrowth, potentially more sticks and twigs to rip holes in your tent. Also, when you get into that undergrowth, you're gonna have more bugs, potentially more ticks. And also, the trail crews, they take time to clean up the campsites. And this is gonna lead me to what happened to us last night. We camped in a campsite, and I've got some footage of it, that we never should have stayed at. I think there was at least 3 or 4 dead trees looming over this campsite, ready to fall at any time. When you're setting up your tent and you're getting into a campsite, do not just look at the ground and say, there's no rock there, here's no root, I can set up here, it's kind of flat. Not only do you want flat ground, yes, you don't want to sleep on a rock or a stick, but more importantly, you don't want a dead tree or dead branches hanging over your tent. In 2015, there was a hiker killed, a tree fell on his tent while he was camping. This happens, and there is a lot of dead trees in the woods. A couple nights ago, we heard a tree crashing as we were sleeping in a shelter, and we heard a tree fall. I mean, they happen all the time. Look around you and see all the trees laying on the ground. They fall, and it's normally the dead trees that get blown over by wind. So this campsite that we stayed at last night had an alarming amount of dead trees, and it would have been very smart of us to move on a couple miles down the trail and find another spot to camp. But it was just something that we overlooked, and it was a mistake, but the best thing you can do is learn from a mistake, and I definitely will always try to be more vigilant of dead trees, because it was nerve-wracking this morning. Wind was blowing and you see those dead trees swaying back and forth, and just makes me think, wow, we were lucky.
2 veteran backpackers inexplicably pitched their tents beneath rotten trees. One of them was killed. The other was named Lucky.
And these dead trees are going to be a more common place in your stealth sites, because your stealth sites are not, kept and groomed like the actual campsites are that most people stay at. If you have a trail crew come through, a lot of times they'll clean up a campsite, and if they see these dead trees, they'll remove those. So if you're gonna stealth camp somewhere, that's another thing that you want to look for, is look up in the air and make sure you're not setting up your tent or your hammock right underneath a dead tree. Your guidebook is not the only place to get information about campsites. One of the best places to get information about campsites is on this trail as you're hiking. Seeing hikers come the other direction, stop and ask. They may have stayed there the night before. They may be a local that has stayed at that campsite a dozen times and knows everything about it and where the water sources are and the best place to put your tent or your hammock. So don't hesitate to ask the people coming the other way, or the other northbounders maybe, if you're going northbound, or the other people going the same direction because maybe they've stayed there before. There's a bunch of information you can find out right on the trail. I've got a little bit of extra information for the White Mountains and camping in the White Mountains. And this is just to add on, because for the most part, tenting and camping on the AT is very similar throughout, except for a couple small portions can be different. White Mountains being one of those. Now, I'm not going to get into the huts on the White Mountains. I think Bigfoot just did a video not too long ago on the White Mountains. If I remember, I'll get a link in the description. But this is just about setting up tents and stealth camping in the White Mountains. If you're looking to camp in the White Mountains, my first suggestion would be is when passing huts to stop and talk to the people that are running the huts. They know more information about that area than anyone will. They've been up there for months at a time. Maybe they're seasonal workers that have worked there for a few years. I mean, they know if there's a good place to camp, they will know about it. And they will freely tell you about it because it's not a prized secret. You know, they don't want people to be in danger up there, so they will tell you where the good camping sites are. When attempting to stealth camp in the Whites, now this is a story I've heard over and over again, and it's not that well known, but a lot of people will look around in the mountains and say, "Ooh, look, here you go, stealth site." The only thing I can tell that this is a stealth site, if I zoom in, let me move over just a bit, fire pit, right there. This one hasn't been used, this one probably hasn't been used in a few years. There's a lot of sticks and debris and stuff like that, but that is a site that is not on the map. There is a lot of sticks, but the ground could be cleaned up pretty quickly. Not really any dead trees around. I'd like to see it a little farther off of the trail. I'd like to be a little farther, but that's not, all in all, not a bad place. And in this section of the trail, it is perfectly fine to stay there. What was I talking about? Oh, White Mountains. What people do in the White Mountains is, when finding a stealth site, you'll be walking along and they'll look at this patch and there'll be this beautiful, nice patch, you know, just the size for their tent, of this soft moss. White Mountains is in the Alpine, and there's like this cushy layer of like soft dirt and moss all over everything. And you see that and you automatically may think, well, I'll just camp right there. That'll just be nice. I'll scooch off the trail and I can go there. Bit of advice. When you set your tent up on that moss, what's gonna happen is it's so soft and cushy, it's gonna be just really nice and comfortable, but you're also gonna leave a dent. And when you leave a dent and it rains, that dent fills up with water, and now you're sleeping in a puddle. I've heard so many people talk about trying to stealth camp in the Whites, and a lot of these have been almost developed now because someone will try to camp there and leave a big dent, and when someone walks by they go, "Ooh, there's a stealth site right there." They sleep there, and the next person stays there, and these little stealth sites start to pop up. But what people don't realize is that they can fill up with water. That's why I always check with the people at the huts and find out the right places to camp. Gonna throw this little bit of advice in there. Don't have to tell most of you, but because it happened to me on this trip, I figured I might as well put it in this video. When camping, if you plan on starting a fire, I saw 2 nights ago this group come in. It was actually at the shelter. They had axes, and they had, because it was close to a road, they were able to carry this stuff in. and they had axes and saws and stuff, and as soon as they set up, they got to work chopping green branches out of trees. Green branches do not burn well. The reason why we gather branches off of the ground is not because not only because we want to clean up the place and make the campsites look nice, but it's because they're dead and have fallen out of trees and they're dry and will burn well. Don't do what these guys did and take a saw and cut out a big branch out of a tree and chop it into pieces, because it's not going to burn good. We're not doing it to be jerks, we're doing it because it just works better if you do it our way. After finding your campsite and you're choosing a spot to set up your tent, make sure the ground is free of roots and rocks is good. That'll keep you maybe sleeping more comfortably. Another thing to consider that some people don't know is making sure that you are not in an indent that is going to direct water to be pooling around where your tent is. And yes, you want to find the flattest piece of ground, but a lot of times those flat pieces can be in a little bit of a recess, and if it rains hard, you may end up with a water issue. I like to find a slightly sloping piece of ground, because that way if it does rain, the water will shed away from where I am. Now, one crucial piece of information to consider when you're trying to find this piece in a slightly sloping piece of ground is when setting up your tent, your head should always be on the upward side as opposed to your feet. Always head up higher, feet down lower, because if you ever tried to sleep with your head lower than your feet, you'll know exactly why you don't want to do that. It is very uncomfortable. The blood continues to rush towards your head and you're going to have a very difficult time sleeping. My last little bit of advice is to be flexible. When you're planning your trip out, you may decide that you have an itinerary and this is the site I'm staying at, this is the site I'm staying at. Just because you chose that site from your couch back home doesn't mean it is the right place for you to stay. Always be flexible. Try to not push yourself too hard so that you can always go a couple more miles down the trail to maybe find a better spot. You may not want to push yourself. When you're through hiking, it's a little different, but if you're doing a section, you may not want to push yourself too late in the evening, so that if you get to a campsite and you notice that it is really not a good spot, or maybe there's some people there that you're not comfortable being around, that you can move on. Well, there you have it, ladies and gentlemen. There's what I know about, well, tripping and falling on the ground. Well, there you have it, ladies and gentlemen. There's my 2 cents on finding a campsite on the Appalachian Trail. I hope that this video has been helpful. And please, if you have any more information about finding campsites and how to pick a good campsite, leave it in the comment section below. And as always, guys, stay tuned for more tips from the trail, because if it worked for me, it may work for you. Bye-bye.
Until then,
Here, we can walk around.
happy trails to
Here's his famous expression. Release and Daryl. Happy trail. Release and Daryl.
Stay safe. Keep your twin blazing, baby.
I like it, I dig it, I want more of it.